Hello and welcome to Spectral Searches. To further investigate the equipment being utilized for ghost hunting, I thought I would address another common device, the laser grid. The laser grid is an interesting example of looking for ghosts, spirits, and other paranormal entities not by direct interaction, but by increasing the sensitivity of our own senses. The laser grid helps the naked human eye to see apparitions in dark areas, more clearly detect when movement happens, and help define physical aspects of anomalies. To understand how this works, we will need to learn both about lasers and the function of the eye. Lasers function through the production of photons. Photons are the fundamental particles that modern physics use to describe light and other forms of electromagnetic radiation. A common way to release photons is through heating an object. The electrons within the object will gain energy, which is then released as thermal radiation, which we see as light. An example of this would be a candle. Thermal radiation is random and releases photons at various wavelengths traveling in different directions. However, the atoms or molecules of the object are not random, and when they are in an excited state, through that gained energy, they release photons of distinct wavelengths. A laser is produced by energizing atoms to an excited state, but not through random thermal processes that would cause various wavelengths. Instead, photons are released by the passage of another photon through an atom with an excited state. This is called stimulated emission. The photon passing through the excited atom must be of similar energy and wavelength to the one being released. Once released, both the initial photon and the released photon can continue to other atoms to release more photons, all of the same wavelengths. The physics can be described as this equation here. The design of a laser utilizes key components. This includes a gain medium, laser pumping energy, a high reflector, an output coupler, and then of course the laser beam. The gain medium is a material with properties that allow it to amplify light by way of stimulated emission. The laser pumping energy for our lasers are typically batteries. The high reflector is a reflective surface which allows the photons to bounce back toward the output coupler. The output coupler is another reflective surface that allows for some of the interactive beam to escape, either through a partially reflective surface or a focused hole. Here is a great representation of how a laser works. So how did we get here with lasers anyway? In 1917, Albert Einstein established the theoretical foundation of lasers in the paper on the quantum theory of radiation. Here, he utilized Max Planck's law of radiation based on probability coefficients for the absorption, spontaneous emissions, and stimulated emissions of electromagnetic radiation. Throughout the 1950s, many physicians worked on the maser, very similar in principle to the laser, but focusing on microwave radiation rather than infrared or visible light. While this is important, it deviates from our discussion on lasers. However, we should recognize that their work helped propel the fundamentals of lasers as well. In 1957, Junichi Nishizawa proposed the concept of the semiconductor optic maser in a patent application. The same year, Charles Townes and Arthur Schawlow began studies in optic masers and submitted their proposal in a patent application as well. At the same time, Gordon Gould worked on his doctoral thesis on the excitability of thallium. He met with Townes and they discussed radiation emissions. Later that year, Gould had his idea with a laser with an open resonator. This would be an essential component for lasers in the future. In 1958, Prokhorov also proposed the idea of using an open resonator. And, at the same time, Townes and Schawlow also decided on an open resonator without knowledge of Prokhorov or Gould's proposals. In 1959, Gould first proposed the acronym LASER, with the ASER acronym would be used for different radiation types. He proposed many uses for the laser, but his patent was denied and was granted to Bell Labs to towns and shallow. This occurred in 1960. This sparked a 28-year lawsuit wherein Gould won his first patent for the optically pumped in-gas discharge laser in 1987. But we'll get back to that. It was in 1960 that Theodore Maiman offered the first functional, albeit only pulse-operated, laser. This was ahead of all the pre-mentioned physicists. Later that year, the Iranian physicist Ali Havan, William Bennett Jr., and Donald Harriot constructed the first gas laser. In 1962, Robert Hall demonstrated the first semiconductor laser, and later that year, Nick Holyonock Jr. produced the first semiconductor laser with visible light, but it had to be operated in cooled temperatures. In 1970, Alferov, Hayashi, and Panis of Bell Labs also independently produced a room temperature continual operation laser. Since then, there have been ongoing innovations such as new bandwidths, maximum output powers, peak energy pulses, line width, minimal costs, and more. While the technology and the physics is really cool, how we perceive them with our eyes is what's important for the paranormal investigations. Humanity has a long history and fascination with eyes. Plato, for instance, in the 4th century BC, said that light emanated from the eye, seizing objects with its rays, known as extramission. However, Aristotle advocated for the theory of intramission, by which the eye received rays rather than directed them outward. In the 2nd century AD, Galen chose the extramission theory because it corresponded well with his image of sight as a function of an optic pneuma flowing forth from the brain to the eyes through the hollow optic nerves. Galen was famous for his work in anatomy and physiology of the eye until the 17th century. He did this by looking at the workings of those that came before him, such as Rufus of Ephesus. Galen was able to describe the lenses, retina, cornea, iris, uvea, tear ducts, and eyelids, as well as two fluids he called the vitreous and aqueous humors. The eye was subject of special interest in medieval Islamic medicine as well. Between the 9th and 14th centuries, most Islamic scholars, such as Al-Kindi and Hunan ibn Ashik, in the 9th century favored the extramission theory of sight. This is that the eyes emitted light. It was thought that there were a series of tunics behind the vitreous humor, such as the retina, whose role was to nourish the vitreous humor and conduct the visual spirits through the hollow optic nerve. In the early 10th century, the great Baghdad clinician Al-Raziz noted the pupil's contraction and dilation. A century later, Al-Hazan noted that the eye was injured by strong light. Both scholars reasonably concluded that the light affected the eyes and not vice versa. Al-Hazans then argued for intramission, light entering the eyes. In the 11th through 13th centuries, medieval European medical practitioners were less accepting of the extramission theory due to the theories presented from the Islamic scholars. In the late 12th century, Master Nicolaus wrote, "The optic nerve, which descends from the brain to the eyes, passes through the center of the eye as far as the crystalline humor. Though it becomes the visible spirit, and as it emerges through the uveal tunic in the cornea, it is mingled with clean air and transports its rays to the body, and thus sight is brought about." In the 1480s, Leonardo da Vinci had advocated the extramission theory. However, by the 1490s, he had reversed his position. In his instance, his shifting viewpoint may have been more theoretical than observational, since his image of the eye was basically two concentric spheres, far less sophisticated than Galen's. In the 16th century, Alessandro Eccolini may have been the first to challenge the idea of the crystalline lens as the main organ of sight. Vesalius retained the importance of the crystalline lens, but strongly denied that the optic nerves were hollow. By mid-century, anatomists had begun to look more closely at the crystalline humor, which no longer seemed round and centered but more oblong and towards the front of the eye. In 1583, Felix Platter argued that the optic nerve was the primary organ of vision. He stated that the crystalline humor played a secondary role and elevated the status of the retina. In 1604, Kepler offered the first theory of the retinal image. Therefore, vision occurs through a picture of the visible things on the white, concave surface of the retina. So how do our eyes work? We see through our eyes when light passes through the cornea, the clear front layer of the eye, and is focused. The cornea is shaped like a dome and bends light. After light passes through the cornea, it will enter the pupil, which contracts and expands to allow increased or decreased amounts of light into the eye. Next, light passes through the lens, a clear inner part of the eye. The lens works together with the cornea to focus light correctly onto the retina. When light hits the retina, specialized cells called photoreceptors turn the light into an electrical signal. These electrical signals travel from the retina through the optic nerve to the brain. The brain then turns the signals into the images you see. What's important for us here are those special photoreceptors, which can be either rod-shaped or cone-shaped. Rod cells are highly sensitive to light and function in night vision. These are more readily activated by low light and movement, such as what we would need to see out of the corner of our eyes, our peripheral vision. These can pick up all wavelengths of light and are very frequently expressed in our eyes. Cone cells are capable of detecting a wide spectrum of light photons and are responsible for color vision. These are found near the center of our eyes and help more of the focused vision. They allow for a higher resolution and are less abundant in the eye. The human eye is incredibly fascinating, and the way in which our brain perceives the signals expressed in the eye is even more fascinating. However, for the sake of the paranormal investigation, what is important is the understanding of rods and cones and understanding how our peripheral vision works, the increased abundance of rod cells, and increased sensitivity of them. The utilization of the laser grid allows for the investigator to more easily detect small changes in dark areas. It can allow for the peripheral vision to pick up rapid distortions of the grid through rod-shaped photoreceptors, and it can allow for more direct visuals as well with cone-shaped photoreceptors. The laser grid simply makes it easier for the human eye to detect the less obvious shapes that elude us in the dark. So as a way to look for evidence of the paranormal with a laser grid, Spectral searches will be utilizing this standard operating procedure. Operation of the subleaf green laser grid. Apply the starlight mode star cap to the laser grid by rotating clockwise onto the laser. Remove the safety clip from the laser grid and rotate it up to the touch switch to maintain pressure on the touch switch. Point the laser grid at an area of interest or suspected apparition location. Inquire with the ghost, spirit, or entity to show themselves by walking through the grid. To further increase the efficiency and accuracy, utilize a recording device such as a cell phone or camera. This will allow the investigator to look back at the footage and look for any specific distortions in the grid to either confirm or deny an interaction. Charging the subleaf green laser grid. The subleaf green laser grid can be charged utilizing any USB charging device, such as a socket with power adapter, power bank, car charger, or laptop. The subleaf green laser grid has a single light on its side to demonstrate the charging and a full charge of laser. When the laser is fully charged, the light will be green. Communication through the subleaf green laser grid. The subleaf green laser grid is utilized for increased visualization of spirits, ghosts, or entities that are not easily detected by the human eye or captured on recording devices. To communicate through the subleaf green laser grid, questions must be formulated to match the detection method. Questions to ask may include, can you please step into the laser grid? Can you please manipulate any of the dots on the grid? Can you move into the laser grid or manipulate the grid for yes, and stay out of the laser grid for no? It is important to pay close attention to the grid during questions, or to ensure a method of watching the grid afterwards is available to visualize and document any distortions seen. While we don't know for certain that ghosts, spirits, or other paranormal events might be detected through distributing a laser grid, the theory is out there. Many people utilize this equipment, and many people feel that they have seen ghosts and spirits with lasers. In order to keep our net of evidence as wide as possible, we will continue to utilize the laser grid in our spectral searches.